Hey there, welcome to Multimedia 100. I'm Curtis Stage, Los Angeles Mission College. So today's lecture is going to be about the principles and elements of design. Now, the reason why we're talking about principles and elements of design, and I'm going to actually say that it's the principles and elements of art and design. And in fact, many of these principles and elements can be applied to photography and film as well. Maybe even some could be applied to music. But for now, I'm going to say principles and elements of art and design. And sometimes I may just say principles and elements of design. So why we're talking about this is really important to have a structure. A lot of times, I'll use this example. A lot of times you'll go to a museum or a gallery and looking at art, and you're like, that looks cool, but I don't know what the artist is talking about. I have no idea what's going on in this. It's visually amazing, but I have no idea what's happening in there. And we're reacting to the form of the piece, but we're not reacting to the content of it. Maybe we might see some content in there that we understand, but a lot of times we're not really knowledgeable of what the artist's idea was, what their intention was in terms of their idea, but we automatically see form. Now, principles and elements of design give us that structure of form that we can then marry to the idea of content, right? To the idea. And so this is why a lot of people can walk through a museum, and I say, at least if you have principles and elements of design down, you could navigate through a museum and a gallery at least talking about the structure. And you'll see what I'm talking about as we go when we start talking about these principles and elements, that they're dealing with the form of the art and design, and they'll be able to at least give us some ammo. And why I want you to have this as an artist or designer or photographer, whatever, is because then it gives you something to create, a basis to create work on. If you've got nothing else, if you've got no ideas, which I'm sure you have ideas, but if you have no ideas, at least it gives you some sort of structure to base what you're doing on. It also gives us something to talk about in terms of critiquing work and looking at work. And then we can go into the idea portion as we move on. As you become more of an accomplished artist or designer, the principles and elements of design just happen. For me, when I'm making work or I'm taking photographs, I have all of that knowledge in the back of my head, but I'm not really thinking about it all the time. It's just there. I've got it because I've used it so often. And then I can just concentrate on the ideas that I have. So I've got those principles and elements down. They're the form. And then the ideas can stream in. Do you see what I'm talking about here? So hopefully you do. So I'd like to start off actually by showing a video. So you'll be watching a video within a video. Kind of weird, kind of meta. So I'd like to show a video of one of the titans of design, Paul Rand. Now, this video is not great quality, but the content in it is amazing. It's short. I want you to watch it all. You might want to rewind and play, kind of a couple times. When it's done, I'm going to kind of come back and talk about some of those key elements. So we're going to watch this video now.
When you say design, everybody has a definition which doesn't correspond to yours. There are many good definitions. One is the synthesis of form and content. In other words, without content, there's no form. And without form, there's no content. A work of art is realized when form and content are indistinguishable. When form predominates, meaning is blunted. But when content predominates, interest lags. But the genius comes in when both of these things fuse. Without the aesthetic means that it's not done with love, but it's done for some ulterior motive. Because it sells, because it's popular, because it's crazy, all this stuff. Graphic design is one of those phrases that doesn't mean anything, because anything that's graphic is graphic. Painting, dancing, if you see it, writing, if you see it, it's graphic. The genre of art, of graphic design, of painting is art. That's the genre. It's all art. the vocabulary or the language of art or of aesthetics. Order, variety, contrast, symmetry, tension, balance, scale, texture, space, shape, light, shade, and color. This is the language of form. Don't try to be original, just try to be good. That sounds sort of naive, but it's true. Without aesthetics, you can't find the truth. To do things with quality. I think this is in the big sense of what aesthetics means. Art is an idea that has found its perfect form. There are too many possibilities. No matter how perfectly you do something, it can still be improved.
All right, so that was a pretty great video. So, you know, some of the things that he was talking about, of course, you know, this guy was, like I said, a titan in design, really at the forefront in logo design and graphic layout design. And as a designer, if you're going to Mission College, you can't leave here without knowing some of this guy's work. So I encourage you to kind of research a little bit more about him. And we'll probably talk about him more in class. Certainly when we talk about logo design in a couple weeks, we'll bring him up again. I like some of the things that he talked about in this video. First of all, you didn't hear him say the principles and elements of design, did you? You didn't hear that. He actually called it the language and art of aesthetics. Same thing. We'll go with his version as well. We'll let him have that. But so he didn't talk about it, didn't say the principles and elements of design, but he listed off a bunch of them. But I like some of the quotes that he said. So one of the great quotes that he had right at the start was, "Art is the synthesis of form and content." That's kind of what I was talking about a little earlier, right? So principles and elements of design are this form, and the content, of course, is your ideas. And I like how art is the synthesis of this, is what he was saying. I also liked how he didn't separate art and design. He was saying that art and design are very much an equal set. In fact, they're in the same family, right? They work together. I also like this quote, "Without aesthetics, you can't find the truth." So that's pretty cool. Aesthetics, I'll define right here. So you've got that right there. So without aesthetics, you can't find the truth. Amazing. I also like at the end where he said, "Art is an idea that has found its perfect form." Really great. Think that says a lot to us. So Paul Rand, an amazing person that you need to know, designer-wise. We'll get back to him, of course, when we talk about logo design. Some of the stuff that he's done, you'll recognize some of those logos, right? Esquire magazine covers, layouts, all that stuff. All right, so let's talk about this. So design elements are the basic units of any visual design, which form its structure and convey visual messages. So I want you to think of the elements as the building blocks of design. Now the principles are what we apply to those elements. Think of them as the actions. Okay, and this is what we're going to talk about next. So they're also a way to work with and organize the elements. Here are some of the basic main principles. Now, you heard Rand talking about these, a few of them. We're going to talk about more, but here are the ones we're going to cover. And we're going to start off with balance. So balance has two parts to it. It has symmetric and asymmetrical. We can get to those in a second. But notice the basketball, bowling ball ad here. That would be called symmetrical design. And then the ad on the right with the big text and then the little text boxes, that would be asymmetrical design. So balance. When you have perfect balance, of course, you're having two objects exactly the same weight in perfect balance or harmony with each other. So pretty clear how this works. And I think it's very interesting. I always ask why, some of these principles of design and art, where do they come from? And I like to have students think about this. They're things that are innate to humans, right? Balance is something that's very important to us. Our bodies, we're always thinking of them. We always talk about, I'm trying to find a balance in my life. There's that kind of balance. But then there's also just a physical balance. We have two legs so that we can, otherwise if we have one leg, we're kind of tipping over. We have two eyes that, kind of physically actually help us balance. Our ears actually physically help us balance. If you have vertigo, right, you've got something wrong with your inner ear, one or both, that's going to throw you off balance. So humans are actually attracted to balance because it's part of what we need as a human to survive. Some of the art and design principles and elements come right out of the physicality of our space. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So back to balance here, we've got perfect balance here, symmetrical balance. Here's a poster. This has symmetrical balance. So if I folded this in half, right, took one side, folded it over to the other side, it'd be perfectly balanced. Yes, there's a little bit different elements on each side of this, left and right, but it would be mostly perfectly balanced. But there's another part of balance to this, top and bottom. Imagine the bottom of this poster with no white splatters down there. There would not be very good balance. That white of her face would really overpower this image completely. And this artist, by putting those splatters down at the bottom, strategically creating an asymmetrical. So clearly, those splatters are a lot smaller than her head and her face. But by putting those down there, it draws our eye down there, and it creates an asymmetrical balance top and bottom, right? So our eyes get drawn down to that bottom area. And those little splatters were smaller. Big shape up here, smaller shapes down here, creating an asymmetrical balance really makes that poster come alive. So if we don't have that, it's not, this poster doesn't work. Here's just some simple, some flyers, posters that you might create as a designer, basic things. They're not anything special, but here's a designer, they had to do two things. They had to create a big poster. They have lots of room to design and created a symmetrical design on the left. And then they have to create a postcard size design on the right. And what are they going to do? They can't include all that information that's on the left side, right? So they have to, they could flip it over. If it's a card, they could put more information on the other side. But on this side, they had to put a certain amount of information and create a balance there. And this one is asymmetrically balanced. The images on the right of the right postcard size image, those are a lot bigger than the text, and they're overpowering. But by having that text block there, that block of text, don't even think about reading that text, just think of about it as a visual block. It creates a balance with the people on the right-hand side. So that's happening. So sometimes when we have balance, we're, again, you're thinking about different objects that are happening. Here we've got Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night, clearly an image that you're probably familiar with. And we've got this, big tree structure that's happening on the left side of the image, town at the bottom. And all those stars and swirly things that are happening are creating those are smaller objects. So think about kind of balance where you have multiple objects. So all the stars and the swirliness is in competition or helping to create a balance with the left side. So the stuff on the right side in the middle, the right side, is trying to create a balance with the stuff on the left side, which is the darkness and the trees and whatnot. So this was Van Gogh's opportunity to really create a dynamic composition here using asymmetric balance. Here's some more asymmetric balance in advertising posters. The poster on the left, we've got, really, really emphasized asymmetric design, right? Where lots of stuff, visual stuff is occurring on the left side of the Paris poster. And on the right side, a lot of white space, a lot of open, empty space. Pretty cool, asymmetric design. Same thing with the poster on the right. We've got this big graphic photograph, and our eyes are always going to go towards that first. And then we've got the text, it's much, much smaller, creating this asymmetric balance, but really dynamic. In some ways, artists and designers like to use asymmetric balance more than symmetrical balance. Symmetrical balance, where everything's equal, sometimes gets boring. Asymmetric can get exciting, right? Moves your eye around. You've got lots of different dynamic spaces possibly happening in your image. So I think a lot of designers and artists and photographers like to go for asymmetric design. So when you're thinking about your layouts of design in your projects coming up for this class and anything you do, really want you thinking about balance here. Okay, so this is really important that we're starting to go there. The next one we're going to talk about is alignment. So this is the next principle. Alignment we really see a lot when we're talking about text, but what alignment does is it organizes information for us. Okay, so you can see not very exciting in either of these. There's no shiny, beautiful pictures. It's all text-based, but we're using alignment. It's how things are organized visually so that we can digest those either easily or not easily. I mean, sometimes you can use alignment in a screwed up way so that it takes your viewer a little longer to see things. But in both these examples, we're seeing how alignment is used. And the one on the right, the alignment is everything's kind of on the right-hand side. And you also notice the asymmetrical balance in this one, in the one on the right, the black and white one. That's pretty cool, right? We've got the big, just think of all that text as an image, and then think of the bottom left corner of that black and white piece as another image, right? Look at that asymmetric balance. But in here, we're talking about alignment and how things line up and how they're organized. So alignment is about organization. The one on the left on this side, on this thing, is a little tougher to read, right? Its alignment is funky. If I'm driving down the freeway or I'm walking through a city and I don't have a lot of time to look at an image as I'm walking or driving, well, the one on the left is not going to work very well. So when we're thinking about alignment, we have to think about who our audience is and what they're going to be, how they're going to be viewing our image. So if I'm looking at a billboard going 75 miles an hour, I don't have a lot of time to look at details and, okay, I'm already by it, right? I need to be able to see things pretty clearly. It needs to be organized pretty well. So if in that case, I would want my alignment to be pretty straightforward, pretty easy to read, things spaced out easily, not a lot of weird angles or anything like that. So alignment is very dependent on where you're viewing it, okay? Where you're viewing the design or the photography or the whatever it is. So the one on the right, obviously everything's center aligned and really easy to read, and that could be put up anywhere. You could be walking pretty quickly and see that information. Here's just an example of how designers, specifically web designers or UI designers, would use alignment when they're laying out their designs. I just wanted to show you this because this is kind of grid-based designs where everything is thought about, all the spaces between objects are thought about, everything is really particular in how it looks and feels. And you'll notice the one on the left, it'd be maybe a web layout, and there's no content in there. It is all the form getting ready to put content in there. And this is actually how you start design for web design. You start off with, how do I want all of my information to be laid out? And then you start putting the information in there. And you're thinking about sizes and spaces and all that. The next one we're going to talk about is emphasis. And we see this a lot every day. Emphasis is pretty clear. Here's a good example of that. What is emphasized here? Well, I don't know. The one that says not me or no me, that would be the one that we'd probably want our eyes going to go, I think I should probably click on that one. It's that green color. If it was bright red, we'd even probably click on it more. So emphasis is really directing our viewer. It's telling our viewer where they need to look first and what choices they might need to make. And this can happen in art as well. This can happen in photography. This can happen in film. If you have, if you're shooting a film and you really want to emphasize something that's scary lurking in the corner back in the dark, you're going to make the viewer's eye go back there somehow, right? And emphasize that little tiny thing that they might not think to look at. Or you might not emphasize something scary back in the corner to scare the crap out of them, right? So emphasis is something that we can really kind of used by, contrasting size and position, color, style, shape, right? Again, it's about the focal point is usually dominating the design. So here's some more examples of emphasis. On the left, of course, there's no way our eye cannot be drawn to this. And on the right, we've got a movie poster. And if you've seen this movie, you know what it's about. But if you haven't seen it, it doesn't matter. That rock and the person above it, we don't know his or her identity, but our eye is drawn to that point right there. So emphasis is pulling us in, telling us something important about that. Now, another cool thing that's happening here is we've got this hourglass shape that's occurring. And that is really coming back to this idea that art is the synthesis of form and content. It's really great. So just what Rand was saying. All right, our next principle is proportion and scale. So I'm just kind of lumping these two things in together. We could kind of spend time on each one of them, but proportion and scale, actually, obviously the size of things. So you'll see this a lot in poster design for movies. Here's a great example of that. Usually the larger thing in the poster is the most important, probably the main actor or actress. And then as the faces get smaller, they're not as important. So we've got this proportion really working well here. So proportion and scale also, again, just like balance, like we talked about earlier, comes right out of nature. So probably some of you have seen this before. The image on the right, that graphic image on the right, is called the golden ratio. And some people believe this is kind of one of the bases of our universe, right? There's a mathematic equation that makes up our, total universe. What's interesting about that, though, is it can really help us create better design. And artists and logo designers and just designers in general use this golden ratio all the time in design. And we see it in a lot of places out in the world. Well, Leonardo da Vinci actually used this purportedly in all of his paintings. And of course, Leonardo was, really into science. He was an inventor as well. So on the Mona Lisa, you can slap this on there and he used that proportion to create the Mona Lisa's face. But we'll see it in things like, we got the aloe there on the right, top right, and you see this golden ratio kind of occurring there. What the golden ratio is, and I just want to be clear about it, is, let me go back to this. If you take the, let's say any two of those pie shapes, the third one is going to equal the size of the two that came before it, and so on forever. So it'll just mathematically kind of keep growing as you add these two elements. So there's a mathematical equation that just kind of keeps expanding. Here it is used in logo design, and we're going to be, again, talking about logo design coming up in this class pretty soon, but lots and lots of companies use the golden ratio as part of their logo design. You don't need to worry about the mathematical equation in this class and trying to figure this out, but I just wanted to let you know that it is, when somebody talks about proportion and scale, the scale for sure, they might be using this as a way to make more dynamic, exciting images. So getting back to looking at some design here. Here you've got it here. Proportion and scale, pretty important. The next one we would talk about is rhythm or repetition. So how objects, of course we see this in music all the time. I mean, this is clearly in music, repetition. But we see this in art and design a lot. Artists will repeat things over and over again. Of course, it creates emphasis, but that rhythm is important, that kind of pattern that happens. Humans, for some reason, we're attracted to pattern. We're attracted to things occurring multiple times. Maybe it makes us feel more comfortable. I have no idea. So you'll see this in design quite a bit. And so let's look at a couple here. So here's some really cool posters. One on the left, just kind of repeating this organic pattern. I don't know really what it, at one point it makes a heart in there, I guess, but looks like little weird teardrop things. And then the black swan repeating, getting this repetition. Really great for that poster because this movie is about a dancer and also how she's got multiple identities possibly. And so really interesting how this artist has created this poster using this idea of repetition in it. Here we'll see, you know, a great poster, right? So repeating, repeating, repeating over and over and over again, and then you get to that point of emphasis, the black hat down at the bottom. So we've got a couple things going on here. We also could say that alignment is occurring here, right? We could also say that that is another principle of design that's occurring. So we've got a couple. In fact, most great art or design pieces will have many of these principles and elements working together. So we're just talking about them kind of independently, but there's an example where they're working together. The next one that I want to talk about is movement, right? Some people call it directional forces. So movement, obviously pretty clear. Obviously things aren't moving in graphic design. They may not be actually moving in photography. They're still images. They may be moving in movies and in films, clearly, but not in graphic design, not in art. But the implied movement is really exciting to us. And of course, as human beings, we are constantly in motion. We don't just sit still and not move all the time. Sometimes we do sit still. But having the idea of movement in our art pieces really kind of creates a dynamic. We want our viewer's eye to move around the work, right? So this is where we're trying to go with movement. So we'll have some designs like these. The one on the left really, you know, looks like that thing is exploding. There's confetti coming out of it. It looks like there's an action happening. And the one on the right for the Olympics, again, it looks like multiple tennis balls are hitting the net. There's an action. There's an implied sense of movement. There's also repetition in here. And that one on the right, there's also a really great sense of asymmetric balance. There's both. There's symmetrical balance up on top. But if we just had the very top of this poster and no net down on the bottom, then this would be very symmetrical. But then if you add the space on the bottom, this becomes an asymmetrical design. So really great. Two more great examples of movement. Love this, really text-based on the left. It doesn't have to be objects that we normally think that move. Text doesn't normally move in our world. We make it move as artists or designers or motion graphics artists or filmmakers. So here we are, we're really implying that life experience has this movement to it. And the movement in the one on the right, this is fantastic, right? That movement is implied through proportion, things getting smaller and scaling back into space. So that is happening through perspective, right? And if you've taken a drawing class, a beginning drawing class or a perspective drawing class, you've talked about perspective. So things getting smaller in space is going to imply they're further away. So that's what's happening here. We've got this idea of movement happening in that poster. The next principle is contrast. Contrast is usually dark to light, right? So black to white. High contrast, what does that mean? What would high contrast mean? High contrast is going to be something that it's extremely black and extremely white. There's not a lot of gray in the middle. So that's called high contrast. Low contrast would mean the whole image is kind of middle gray. There's not some extreme blacks, no extreme whites, everything. Think of low contrast as a cloudy, overcast day, or sun, the sun going down, and you just get to that point of not sunset, but just past that, right? Twilight. Twilight has very low contrast. Everything is muted. Everything kind of looks the same. It's a little hard for us to see in twilight. High contrast, things are very easy to see, right? So you've got things like stop signs. They're high contrast. There's no question mark. Super bright red, white text on top of that, very easy to read, stop, right? Think of a stop sign if it was low contrast, if everything was like, if it was like pink writing on a red background, that would be low contrast, and that would not be good for us. We would miss those stop signs. Oh, I didn't see that. Sorry. It didn't pop out to me. So contrast is a really important part of art and design. And let's look at some examples. Here we go. Two posters here. The one on the right is by, we're going to talk about this artist, designer, Saul Bass. He famous for creating movie titles and movie posters, among other things, and logos. High contrast. He's also, of course, using other principles of design that you're probably picking up on. More high contrast. I love the original iPod advertisements. They were super high contrast. And what was going on here? Think about those people and what was happening in there. And in our discussion, I want to talk a little bit about that, about why do you think this, this ad by Apple was good? Why did it work? And then also, why were they using contrast? Why are those people in those ads just pure black? I want to have that as one of our discussion topics in Canvas modules, right? You're going to see that discussion topic. That's going to be one of them, the original Apple ads. Let's get in a discussion about this, right? I'm not going to explain it here. I want you guys to talk about it. So here we go. Here's a photograph using contrast. Contrast can also be scale as well, but we'll get into that at a later date. So the next one I want to talk about is unity. Unity is kind of bringing things together, bringing all of these principles and making multiple principles together, but more, so that's one aspect of it. But another aspect of unity is, look at the one on the left. Do you see all the little elements inside the shapes, right? So you've got the person crossing the street. Inside that person crossing the street, of course, is the coffee beans. It's also inside the coffee cup, and it's inside the play sign, right? So what Unity is doing is it's taking multiple elements, taking multiple, form, like, objects, and with those multiple objects, it's creating other objects. We see that in this bridal shower one's a great example of this. So the umbrella, we get that as a shape of umbrella, and unifying, it's all unified as an umbrella. But the individual shapes themselves don't say anything about an umbrella. If you just took all of those shapes out of there, no umbrella would come to your mind, except for the bottom handle of the umbrella. But if you just look at the top of the umbrella, a fork and a spoon and, coffee, pot and mug, none of those say umbrella. Hearts, they don't say umbrella. But when you put them together in this unifying shape, that unifying shape creates the umbrella. That's unity, okay? Now, let's talk about elements. And they're the building blocks of art and design. And some of those main elements are, of course, are line, color, size, shape, space, value, texture. And Rand talked about a couple of these, or maybe all of these, I can't remember. So we're going to talk about each one of these. The first one is line. How can we use line as an artist or designer to create dynamic images? The illustration on the left, that's Eric Clapton, using all lines to create this drawing or illustration. The one on the right, very graphic, really cool, just using lines to as elements. Remember, this is not a principle. This is an element, physical object. Here's two more. So we've got this. We've got these two posters that are using line. Very exciting. The one on the black is very minimal, right? It's like, okay, yeah. So that is like a periscope and a sub, on a sub, and it's just using simple lines, and then also kind of talks about a clock as well, because in this movie, of course, time is running out. Any movie where time is running out, you got that theme. There's going to probably be some sort of danger occurring, time's running out, gotta, save somebody or don't die or whatever. You're gonna probably see some clock situation in the design. So we got this Hunt for Red October, we got this periscope thing, and we also have a clock situation going on. I like the one on the left where they use these white lines to hold the text. Pretty cool. More examples of line. Now, these designs right here are coming from something called Swiss design. And this is a 20th century design movement that we still see today. It's very important today. Swiss design. If you take my Multimedia 110 class, which is all online, that class we talk a lot about Swiss design in it. But if you are attracted to that kind of image, that kind of graphic image where they're really using shapes and lines and it's minimal, then that's called Swiss design. And I encourage you to look that up and kind of explore that a little bit more and see kind of how that came into being. Part of this class is really important for you to investigate some of the things we talk about on a deeper level. And so please do that. All right, so back to these posters. Really love these. Again, we could talk about scale on the one on the right. We could talk about balance, right? We could talk about line clearly. But if we were talking about the principles, we get about scale and balance. So we got that going on. We could talk about maybe, talk about probably emphasis with this, those concentric circles are kind of drawing our eye in. So here we go with color, the next element. Here's two posters that would happen around the same time of year, but notice how these artists use different colors to say that, to tell us about the same time of year. Pretty cool. Same thing. Color is probably something we respond to the most as human beings. Like, you buy a car usually based on color. You usually are not going to buy a bright pink car, probably because, you might like bright pink, and that's totally fine. I'm fine with bright pink, but I'm probably not going to drive it because I don't want to call unnecessary attention to myself. I'm probably not going to wear a bright pink suit anytime soon with a big green tie because I probably don't want to draw that kind of attention to myself. So we usually will choose things in our life based on how we want to represent ourselves out in the world. So color really does that. And we're attracted to color as human beings. Color people's eyes, color people's hair, color people's skin, obviously. We're talking about, interaction with each other. But we're also attracted to color around the things around us, right? Beautiful, happy, soft colors in a hospital. Obviously, are going to make people, cheery colors are going to make you feel better if you're hanging out in the hospital. Dismal gray and black and whatever isn't going to work in a hospital. It's like, but gray and black might work really cool in a, kind of an industrial design, arty space. But they're not going to work in another place. So think about how color affects you. And that is another discussion that we're probably going to have in our discussion module. How does color affect you as an artist and designer? So get on that. The next one we're going to talk about, the next element, is size. I love this old ad with Crest, right, where they used size for those toothbrushes to tell us about a family, right? So we've got mom, dad, sister, brother, brother, sister, whatever, right? And that's really, the size is helping us see family there. And humans just do that automatically. We just try to, kind of anything that's a, non-human shape, we'll try to make into a human shape. Size on the right-hand side, of course, color on the right-hand side as well. But look at the big, bold size of this text, and then the very small text mixed with it. Really good use of size on the right. Another great use. Think about this Kendrick Lamar album cover. If he had the word damn with the period on the end, so damn, right? He's not saying damn. It's not small and little. Like if you saw damn with a period really tiny down on his sleeve or something, it would not have the same impact as it does when this thing's bold and in your face right above his head in red, by the way. So using color to really emphasize something. So size can really be an important factor when we're trying to draw somebody's attention to something. We really want them to think about something. We want to really, it can be an emphasizer. Two more great examples of using size. Like it. So the next element we're going to talk about is shape. And there's multiple shapes that we have to think about. So we've got organic shapes. We've got shapes that are, and when I say organic, I'm talking about not organic like produce or anything like that. I'm talking about things that are things that we'd see in nature. We've got abstract shapes, and we've got geometric shapes, right? So we've got abstract shapes, geometric shapes, and organic shapes. So I want you to think about those three shapes, and we see them all around us. More great examples of shape. Nice. Next one we're going to talk about is space. So how much space is between things, right? This kind of goes along a little bit with some of the other principles. Really, you're using principles with space a lot. So you could, kind of really talk about proportion maybe with space. But space is a space around objects, how much space is there around things. So the graphic on the left, really lots of space around that shape, those little shapes. And then the one on the right, not a lot of space. almost equal amounts of space between black and white. So our designs can get really exciting when we really think about what's the space around both positive and negative. You've probably heard this before, positive and negative space, right? So it's not just the shape that you have, a shape of an object, but the space around that object. I really want you to be thinking about when you're either doing a drawing or a painting or a graphic design layout or taking a photograph, or even if you're a filmmaker and you're shooting something, what's that space that's happening around the objects? Really important. And that is an element that you can use as an artist to really say much more than than you normally would if you're not thinking about space. It's very hard. In photography, you can also talk about deep space and shallow space in film as well. You can talk about it in design too. Deep space, shallow space. So it's not just about space around objects. It's sometimes about deep and shallow. So here's some more that are talking about space. We got positive and negative working together. Nice. Value. Really great. Look at the one on the left, Magic Johnson from the Lakers. He was my favorite Laker growing up. That value this is all purple and yellow in that poster. This whole thing is made up of the values from purple to yellow. So we're talking about kind of everything from light to dark for yellow and everything light to dark for purple. And that light to dark is value. And the one on the right, same thing. We've just got one color, purple. And it's the value range from light to dark that's creating the image. And you'll see value here. All value of pink in this from light to dark. Very cool. Texture. We really respond to texture in the world around us. We don't think about it very much, but we can really include this in our designs. Texture helps us, give objects some sense of excitement. It makes things not feel so flat. A lot of times in our designs, if you think things are feeling too flat, you could add texture to them and it'll create a little visual excitement for people. Some people like really flat designs. Some people like, so when we talk about that Swiss design, they didn't use much texture, if any. Some artists say, I don't want any of that Swiss design, very flat, minimal. I want minimal, but I don't want very flat. I want things to have some sort of texture to create some visual excitement. So we can use texture to do that. So here we'll see texture in both of these. Love the poster on the left, Looper. That kind of explosion texture really gives a space for the artists to the graphic designer, the artist, to create the text in the middle. You'd never be able to read that text in the middle if there was no texture in there that text could sit on top of. So texture also allows us to create areas in our design that you can kind of separate from other areas. Oh, by the way, we got texture in the one on the right. We have another thing going on we have a principle going on in the one there, right? We have all those words that spell out one, and that is unity. Pretty great. So I want you to keep an eye out for some of these other things that are happening. And here's a great texture example. All made in Photoshop. No photography at all in there. Pretty cool. Few designers we need to know. I was talking to you a little bit earlier about Saul Bass. So he's, again, another titan in design. Saul Bass is famous for, again, making these movie posters. So here's two examples. Shining, you're probably familiar with both these movies. Notice how he's very minimal, uses texture. The one in The Shining, we got the texture there in the words, really great. He didn't like to use photographic images in his work. He wanted to keep these things very simple, but even though they're simple, they say a lot. And they're bold colors, they're high contrast, really help us see these things quickly and get excited about them. So you'll note that in all of his posters, really high contrast, really simple shapes, very elegant use of space, positive and negative is happening in here. His shapes are, right, they're very childlike even sometimes, right? Crudely drawn, very quick, exciting. I was at Comic-Con a couple years ago. This dude was selling these posters there and of course was basically ripping off Saul Bass. I went up to him, I said, hey man, these look like Saul Bass. And he's like, completed my sentence. He's like, yeah, Saul Bass? Yes, I know. I was like, okay, just want to make sure you know that that's who you're ripping off here, but these look like Saul Bass posters. Anyways, dig them. Totally cool. He was selling for like $60 too. I was like, oh, okay, all right, a little expensive here. Anyways, here's some logos by Saul Bass. You probably recognize some of these. We're going to talk about a few of these when we have our lecture on logo design. Another artist I want to talk about is Charlie Harper. He was well known for his illustrations. He was really excited about using animals and nature, very elemental shapes. What I love about what Charlie Harper was doing was he was taking really simple shapes and creating these by hand. There was no Photoshop or Illustrator at this point when Charlie Harper was doing these things. But if you look closely at these, you look at how, if you break them down, they're simple shapes, circles, triangles, rectangles, squares. Right? And he creates these beautiful images that you can almost list off almost every principle and element of design in most of his work. Right? You start seeing all of them, repetition, clearly, right? Color, balance, space, unity. He's really kind of creating a lot of things all at once. And that's why I think people have been very attracted to Charlie Harper's work over the years. He's dead now, so is Saul Bass, so is Rand. They're all dead, but their work lives on, and it's great to know these guys. And I really like Charlie Harper. This was a person I grew up with. Almost all my textbooks were Charlie Harper was the cover of my textbooks when I was a kid. The government used these things. So I love this one. Look at how we've got this real sense of repetition happening in here, scale, balance. You talk about asymmetrical balance, color, right? Line, shape, proportion. Amazing. Fun to look at when all the things come together. And I want you to be thinking about that as artists. When you're starting to create things, don't feel like you have to be an amazing drawer sometimes. I mean, he probably could draw really well, but what he was really great at was taking these simple ideas and putting them together. We can all kind of piece together images with using simple shapes. We can all do that. So nice building blocks as an artist. This is him, Charlie Harper, getting kind of wild. And those feathers seem a little crazy. I really get a sense of rhythm in this one. Really feels like motion occurring with those feathers that are kind of light and wispy. I get this really great sense of movement. In here, an amazing sense of movement here. Right? We're getting all these lines and shapes of these zebras moving in and out. Kind of our eyes are just bouncing all over the place with something like this. So he's really pulling in a lot of the principles and elements of design to create this piece. It looks chaotic, but you start kind of seeing the zebras, and then you also see a unified whole as an abstract image. Imagine if there was no legs or heads on these things. This could be just an amazing abstract painting or graphic design. So really cool. The funny thing is this, just a little side note, is this idea here, Charlie Harper, he didn't come up with it. This was something called Razzle Dazzle in World War I, going into between World War I and World War II, I think. No, probably World War I. A British designer kind of went to the British government and said, hey, Germans are sinking our ships. What if we painted them like zebras? Because this was before that they had all the high-tech gear that they have now to be able to see the ships from long distances away. They had to use sonar, and they had to use visuals to be able to see. So periscopes, if you're in a submarine, You know, right? You have a periscope coming up, and you're looking through that periscope, and you're seeing that shit. Yeah, it's 150 yards that way, and it's moving to the right. Whatever. I don't know how they did it, but then they have to kind of time their launch of their weapon, and hope that it hits. Well, if they can visually see which direction a ship is going, then it's really easy to kind of do this. If they can't see which direction it's going, through something like this, razzle dazzle. So it worked for a little while, right? It's kind of cool. So Charlie Harper, little razzle dazzle here, and then we saw this razzle dazzle happening out in the real world. Milton Glaser, another titan of design and art, really famous for logo design. You're probably very familiar with the DC Comics logo. Well, this is the dude who made it. Just want to kind of show you some artists. Famous Bob Dylan poster on the right. You may have seen that in your life. What's he doing there? We've got that real contrast of Dylan's face in the background, that positive and negative shape, then his hair creating these cool psychedelic colors. Awesome. The blues man on the right, Lightning Hopkins, or on the left, Lightning Hopkins, with this kind of exciting color thing happening there. Really great. He's using line and color to really attract us on both of these. And then he did the I Love New York logo, and he did the Mad Men original posters for the show, if you ever watch Mad Men. Milton Glaser, still creating great work today. He's getting up there in age, so he's still creating some amazing stuff. More of Milton Glaser's work. New York Magazine, there's their logo. Juilliard School of Music, he would design posters for them. And then even doing his studio, even doing, beer labels, logos and beer labels. So he'll do anything from pretty, famous I Love New York that, almost every New Yorker has something like that in their house somewhere, either on a t-shirt or bumper sticker or whatever, all the way down to beer stuff. So okay, so that's our lecture on principles and elements of design. I'll see you next time.